All right, thank you, gentlemen. Well, welcome. It is good to be here in Rio de Janeiro. I'm here with my 13-year-old son. First time to be in a new continent, South America. So we're glad to be with you. Looking forward to meeting some of our old friends from places that we've been around the world, and of course the new folks. Now, what I want to do is just give you a quick bio to give you a sense of some of the organizations I've started, and/or grown, and/or advanced. Gerald was good to mention a couple of them. I started as a homeschool dad, just trying to educate my children, reluctantly, as a matter of fact, like many of us possibly were forced into this in some way. And then as I became more committed to this ideology of homeschooling, I realized that, I'd need to participate in leadership in some way. And that's when I became a board member of North Carolinians for Home Education, which is a state organization in North Carolina. Typically, each of the 50 states have one or possibly more organizations that work geographically. I was on that board for 12 years and then became an ambassador for the Homeschool Foundation, which is a nonprofit. It has a completely different purpose, and that is to serve homeschool families that are in need. They've either lost a job, maybe a spouse has died, or a natural disaster such as a flood or a fire has wiped out their homeschool curriculum. How do they continue? And so that's a completely different type of organization I've been a part of. Then, of course, in 2008, I acquired a publishing company, Apologia. And so for the last 8 years, I've been running and growing and trying to advance the curriculum development. And so we sell books. That's part of our model that I'll explain in a little bit. In 2009, we started from scratch a nonprofit organization with the specific goal to invest in the global homeschooling movement. That's why we're here. That's why we're a sponsor of GHEC, because we want to see what good can happen in other countries when homeschooling starts to thrive and succeed and do better. Because homeschooling will transform your country for the good. And so that's a good investment of our time, energy, and money. And then in 2014, with Lee's son, Robert, who's here, Robert and I are founding board members of an organization called Homeschool Now USA. So it's only 2 years old. It's a fledgling organization in many ways, and it has one goal: to grow the population of homeschooling in the United States faster than it's naturally growing without any proactive help. So it has one singular purpose. Now, I didn't even mention the sports leagues that you just begin, the co-ops, the musical theater groups, and all the other type of activities that when parents want to see good for their children, they just naturally make it happen. So the question that I want to try and answer here, and I'll leave time for some Q&A at the end, is what are some good methods, principles, and fundamentals for starting, growing, or advancing an organization? So in many ways this will sound, and I've tried to think in terms of Business 101. So this is your MBA, your mini MBA for the weekend. Fundamental number one is you have to know your why. If you watch any TED Talks, and I know one of our presenters this weekend is a TED Talk presenter, you've probably heard of Simon Sinek, and he has a talk about your golden circle. What is your why? Why are you even thinking about this? It really is your most important starting place, because that's going to be your motivation to get started. It's going to be what rallies the team, and it's going to be what gives you as a leader the momentum to push forward. So as an example, at Apologia, our mission is to help homeschooling families learn, live, and defend the faith. And so I constantly remind the team that's what we're doing. We just help some homeschooling families. We just help them learn by developing a new piece of curriculum. We're helping them live this lifestyle. The same with Apologia Mission. Yes, we're definitely going to be a supporter and a sponsor of the Global Home Education Conference, because that's our mission, to invest in the homeschooling community worldwide. So it was an easy decision. Knowing your why will answer questions for you very quickly so that you don't get off on tangents and rabbit trails. It'll keep you focused on why you exist. Fundamental number 2 is designing your model. This is your what. Now, in Business 101, often they talk about the product, the price, the place, and the promotion. Those are often called the 4 Ps of how you run a business. You have to decide what is your product, and I put that in quotes because it might be a book or a course that you're selling. It might be a service. Maybe you're providing testing service. Maybe you're providing consulting for the home educating families in your area. Maybe you're a cause. So you see 3 different ways here. You could be selling a product, you could be serving something that people might exchange money, or it might be, look, we want to advance homeschooling globally. Please donate, because oftentimes, as Mike said, money helps make it happen. And so what is your starting model? Which one of these is going to be the way you design the organization, in a sense, from the financial standpoint? Are you selling actual products that you buy and resell, that you develop? Is it a service, or is it a cause? Typically, you need to pick one and hone in on that. Oftentimes, you can do a couple of these. Third, fundamental, is committing to your values. This is your how. How are you going to go about this why? How are you going to go about this what? This starts developing the culture within the organization. Okay? Now, just like in the fundamental number 1, you want to write down your mission statement. That defines why. In this one, I highly recommend writing down your corporate values. What is this organization going to place a high value on? I suspect home education will be a value of whichever organization you're starting. At Apologia, it's one of our written values. It's obvious, but it's still important to remind ourselves, what do we value? What's important to us? A couple other examples to give you an idea is we value family. The way this plays out and the way I remind people in our organization how to live it is we're doing it right now. One of our employees had a death in their family. So I reminded them, do not worry about work. We'll pick up the slack behind you. You go take care of your family, go spend time away, take care of whatever estate issues are required. We'll be back here when you get here, because we value family. And that's a practical way that we see it play out. Another is quality. Now, you could value the cost to do things in an inexpensive way. You possibly could value time. We want to do things quickly, or we want to take as long as possible and do it right. But you need to decide. Are you going to value things like quality, cost, or time? And one other example I'll give you is in our organization, we value partnerships. The way that plays out is I intentionally seek out other people, other organizations, other institutions that I can lock arms with and work together, because I believe I can accomplish more working with somebody else rather than reinventing the wheel and doing the same thing they're doing, only better, supposedly. But if I work with them, we can actually develop a curriculum faster, that's better quality, and that can reach more people because they have an audience that I can't reach. And so I value partnering with other organizations. So you can decide and write down what are the things you value in this organization, and that will start defining the culture, and it'll help see how you actually get the work done. Fourth, very important, choosing your team carefully. Oftentimes it's said that partnerships always end, and they always end badly. When you're building a team, you have to think differently. And the best word that I like to think of is think long term. In America, there's a phrase that says, hire slow and fire fast. There's some positive things to consider in that. But I prefer to think hire for the long term. And then if you have somebody on the team that's not working out well, try to think long term again. Do I just need to invest more time with this person to help them achieve better? Do I need to put them in a different part of the organization? Or are they not a fit? That does happen sometimes. Later today, in a panel discussion, I'll be talking about conflict resolution, and I'll talk about a detail in building your team better. But you're going to thrive on communication. No matter how many people are on your team, communication is going to end up being key in how you communicate with your people outside your organization and internally, and eventually there's going to be conflict of some kind, and I'll talk through some details about handling conflict later. Fundamental number 5, and I have 6 of these, so we got one more after this, is to set your goals. Another key in goal setting is to write them down. It's real easy to have a brainstorming session and say, okay, here's our goals for the year, and then everybody leaves, and 2 months later you come back and you're talking about it, and it says, does anybody remember what our goals were? There's something powerful about writing them down. But once they're written down, you need to track them and measure them. Because here's the classic saying, you only manage what you measure. If you're not tracking something and seeing is it going up or down, you don't know what levers to pull to make things better or to slow things down or speed things up. So have your few goals. We want to have 1,000 members of our organization by the end of the year. We want to raise $10,000 by the end of the year. We want to have this product developed and ready to present to our audience by the end of this year. So put a time frame on it, write it down so it's specific, and besides, writing it down helps make it more specific so you can say, okay, what actually is the goal? Write it down, measure it, and track it so that you can see where are you going. Now, with my team, I meet with managers once a month. Everybody has weekly meetings, but then I personally think the most valuable meetings we have are our quarterly meetings. Because you're working hard for a month or 2 or 3, and then you finally get together on the 3rd month, and you say, okay, let's really stop and step back for a minute. Let's look at these goals that we've written down for each group, each individual, each department, and now let's say, where are we? And there's always something amazing that happens. We realize in this longer time period of 3 months that, that goal doesn't make sense anymore. And so it's not just about communicating and managing it. Now it might be time to adjust and say, that one's not making sense. Don't worry about that one, and let's reprioritize something else. Matter of fact, there's a goal we need to put on the list that wasn't even in our minds 3 months ago. And so by getting together, it may be different time periods, but for me, I find that the quarterly meetings really allow for that adjustment of the goals, and that's not changing your goals, that's finally a literal adjustment. And then fundamental number 6, related to how homeschooling in particular can transform a country, is there's going to be successes. Celebrate those successes. There's going to be failures. You're not going to have 1,000 people in your organization by the end of the year. You're going to have 100, and you're going to think, okay, what do we do? Do we give up, or do we say, okay, we got started just slower than we thought. Let's persevere to next year. Let's change the game plan. We learned quite a bit. Now what? But this will take you back to fundamental number 1 every time. Why are you doing this? If your why is correct, you will be motivated to figure it out. What do we need to change to make this work next year? So celebrate the victories. Don't just say, great job, pat on the back, on to the next thing. Celebrate those well. And persevere with passion through the valleys and the failures because of your why. So, quick summary. Know your mission. Design your model. Commit to your values. Choose your team carefully. Set your goals. And persevere with passion. So I would be glad to answer questions with you about where you are in starting, growing, or advancing an organization, or what else that might be of use to help you out here. Yes.
As far as choosing your team carefully, in my situation, it's kind of, are you willing? Come on. Sorry.
You can just repeat the question.
As far as choosing your team carefully, in our organization, as small as it is, it's kind of, if you're willing, you're kind of in. And that's that's how we choose our team. If that we've tried to be sure that people are committed, and that's kind of the key goal, and that they're on the same page as far as the why we're doing things. But sometimes there's just not a lot of choice, and so
Yeah, you don't want to just hire the next person that walks in that can breathe. That's alive. The word commitment, I think, is important. When you interview somebody, I would recommend some sort of interview, even if it's just, hey, let's go to lunch so I can tell you more about the organization. But you need to think of it as an intentional interview. I have a long list of standard questions that I ask to get to know the person. Things like, what was the most recent book you read? What's the most recent travel experience that made an impact in your life? Strange questions like that, just to get a conversation going, see how diverse and wide range this person is. But I always ask them, what do you know about the mission of my organization? So I don't tell them what it is. I see if they even know what the mission is first. And they'll usually have an answer that's fairly close, but it's probably not to help homeschooling families learn, live, and defend the faith. They don't have it memorized yet. And so then I'll tell them, well, it's actually this, and I'll explain it a little bit, and then I'll ask them, how do you think you can contribute to us achieving our mission? And now we've just had this dialogue, and they have a little bit better sense of, oh, okay, yeah, now I really understand better what you're doing, and I also have a better sense of how I can contribute. Or they'll give a really lame answer, and you'll wonder, okay, they may be breathing, they may be willing, but they may not be the strongest team player when they're here because they may not really get it completely. And that's where you're going to have to either develop somebody or train them on the mission, repeat it, a few hundred times, and let them see by example. Yes?
Davis, sorry.
And then a question up here.
It's my son, so I just took the microphone from him. Davis, which of these is the most difficult, and tell us a story about one of those that you had the most challenge with and how you overcame that challenge.
One of the organizations or one of the
one of those numbers. No, one of those number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Which is the toughest one in your view? And give us a story about how you overcame one of the challenges.
I do think the fundamental number 1 is the most important. Number 4, choosing your team carefully, is probably the most difficult because, as you were saying, when you interview somebody, if you're saying, okay, let's bring you onto the team, they may give a really good first impression. They may be a really capable person, but you don't really know them yet. And until they're working for 1, 2, 3 months, do you have a sense of how hard they work, how good they work, how much of a team player they are? Do they work alone or they work as a group? And so it takes time there. And people are funny. They're what I like to call the most valuable part of your organization, but the most variable as well. So I find that one the most difficult because nobody likes to let somebody go. And some team members don't work out. And when they know it and you know it, then it's time to part ways. And that's no fun. But you've got to have people to actually help you achieve all this other stuff, and they need to be on board. So this afternoon I'll talk about conflict resolution because conflict is inevitable. Combat is optional. That's the main point that I'll make. But there was a question up here.
In the initial stages of homeschooling, the organizations are mostly associations. I think that's what that lady is referring to. And an association is a group of people with a common goal. And such an organization usually doesn't have any product to sell, doesn't have any services to deliver, and therefore doesn't have an income stream, and therefore makes use of volunteers. And I think there's the problem. When you are making use of volunteers, how can you choose the people? Because you must just take what you get. And sometimes some volunteers are very passionate and hard-working, and they put a lot of effort in certain things and can take the organization away from their mission, that their focus is on something totally different than what their mission is.
Excellent point. And let me mention a few things about the organization I was a part of for 12 years in North Carolina. It was a state organization for homeschooling. We relied heavily on volunteers. The service we provided was a conference. That was our most significant service to homeschoolers in the state, was putting together a conference, lots of work, requiring many people, most of whom were volunteers. And you didn't know how many you'd get in a given year. You might have 100 helping this year and 50 helping the next year, and then 10, and then back to 100. You never knew who you were going to have and how many. And so it was very difficult, like you're saying. What we found was very helpful in making that work better than in some years was when we had somebody on our board who did nothing but organize the volunteers. I mean, that was their job. And so they came up with creative ideas such as, okay, we'll give them all audio tapes of all the sessions as their payment for their work. And that was the best incentive we gave everybody. That's why I mentioned that one. We tried other incentives. And then gave them training, which sometimes did and didn't work because, again, it depends on who you have on the team. But knowing there was one person corralling this herd of people helped bring some semblance of order to the disorder and at times.
I'm Ray Sheen from the U.S. also, and like Davis, have been on several of the state organizations. We have found to the question about where do you get people to be in your leadership, how do you select them? We've started with the volunteers, and we give volunteers responsibilities and see, do they line up with our goals? Do they try to take the organization in a different direction, like you mentioned? And we test through volunteers how we decide who actually joins the organization in terms of leadership. And so we build it in that fashion. We still do that we now have an organization with a lot of paid staff. I still start all of our staff as volunteers because we have volunteer positions, and it's the volunteers that we then recruit the paid staff from.
Excellent point. Other questions or comments?
Yes. Yes, question right there.
Hi. Just for curiosity, why the name Apologia?
Yes, the name Apologia, that company started in 1994 in a home by one person. And then in 1999, it became an official organization with a legal tax ID number and all that. And so the name was started in 1994. It's a Greek word, which means to defend the faith. And so part of how that organization began was to try and defend the faith by writing a creation-based science curriculum. That was the method, the how, that they were going to achieve their why. And then when I acquired it in 2008, I expanded that by making sure that all the new subjects that we develop were based on some kind of biblical worldview and not religiously neutral. So that's what drives us. That's our passion in everything that we do.
Just a quick comment on volunteers, because I know what you mean, where it's not a matter of who you pick, but who actually shows up, who will do the work that no one else wants to do. I think one of the things you can do, though, is take a very proactive approach and try to cast some vision for the position of volunteer and really recruit them. So if you have 20 people show up to your conference, you'll see some and you'll think, boy, I'd love to have that person in the organization, really get to know people. But that person doesn't want to volunteer, right? But if you spend a little bit of time building a relationship with them and say, we got this amazing feedback, or I'm really excited to accomplish this, what's your passion? And if you find that synergy of passion and mission with those people, some people who wouldn't volunteer in the first place end up volunteering. And I know for myself and a lot of other state and provincial leaders, sometimes you'll have your eye on someone for 2 or 3 years before they actually volunteer. So it's a lot harder when you can't pay them. But I think it's still, it's almost a leadership thing, right? Of selecting your people and then trying to recruit them to the best of your ability.
Right, and a final point I'll make to that is, the communication. The more frequent you communicate, saying the same thing more than once, because it doesn't always register with everybody. As an example, we have a conference team at Apologia, and these are people we pay, but they only work for us maybe 6 weekends a year. That's all they work. But we still bring them to our training, and then I include them in our email communications for the time period that they're working for us through conference season, because they inevitably will give a wrong answer at a conference. They'll make a promise to a customer that is, I don't know where they came up with the idea to give this answer. They should have just said, as we trained them, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll find somebody who does. But instead, they'll give an answer, and then our office, who works every day, 12 months a year, will get a phone call from somebody saying that they were promised something that we can't fulfill. And then we re-communicate to the temporary conference staff, there's been a problem. You need to be aware of this. I don't know who it was, but please, if you don't know the answer. And so communication, constant communication, overkill communication is vital with your team. Well, I look forward to being with you the rest of the week. Thanks for your time this morning. I hope it was helpful as you, again, just begin some of these organizations that can make a difference in your country.
Davis, thank you. Really appreciate your being here and your support of the conference and your presentation. This is an illustration of where this conference will provide you with an opportunity to interact, to ask questions, to discuss with experts. What are experts? Experts are people that have made the mistake already. And I would just encourage you to take the opportunities to talk to people like Davis and others throughout that are going to be here for the next days, and pick their brains and have the opportunity to learn and to grow. Now, just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean it's not going to work for you. And I think it's important that we look at different models and different ways of doing things. It's time for a break. The next half hour until 11 o'clock is a break. Where are their freshmen? So are they just outside? Just out that way, down the hall. Take the time to refresh yourselves back here at 11 o'clock, and we'll be taking a trip around the world to share what's happening in organizations around the world, and we'll have 2 hours actually for that. But Mike, we got an announcement?
If you are one of the presenters for the next session, if you could just stay for a moment and come up here, we need to talk with you about something. Thank you. Enjoy your coffee break. It's down the hall.